The marble halls of the Valari Imperial Palace ran slick with silver blood. Princess Lyra's heavy silk slippers slapped frantically against the pristine flooring as she rounded a corner, her chest heaving with every ragged breath. Behind her, the rhythmic, metallic marching of the Imperial Inquisition drones grew louder, their twin-lens optic scanners casting sweeping red beams across the towering pillars. Only an hour ago, Lyra had sat in the Grand Chamber, watching her father stripped of his signet ring by Grand Chancellor Vane, who declared the royal bloodline traitors allied with forbidden human sympathizers. The coup had been swift, silent, and absolute, leaving her as the sole surviving heir marked for immediate execution. She ducked into a narrow maintenance alcove, pressing her back tightly against the cold alloy wall to muffle the sound of her gasping lungs. Her fingers clutched a heavy, encrypted royal datapad against her chest, the only object she managed to grab before fleeing her quarters. The datapad contained deep archive files detailing the true history of the galaxy, secrets that Chancellor Vane had spent decades scrubbing clean. She heard the drones pause just outside her hiding spot, their internal processors whirring as they calculated her trajectory. A heavy dread settled in her stomach. She knew she was entirely cornered with nowhere left to run. Stepping out of the alcove, Lyra sprinted toward the grand balcony overlooking the lower levels of the Capitol spire. The public address system echoed off the glass spires below, broadcasting Vane's cold, echoing voice to the millions watching across the Empire. The extermination is complete. The human anomaly is a myth, and order has been restored to the Valari Dominion. As she reached the edge of the balcony, a sleek Imperial sniper drone locked onto her position from across the plaza. Lyra closed her eyes, bracing for the searing heat of the plasma bolt, waiting for the end that felt inevitable. Instead of a plasma bolt tearing through her chest, a deafening crack split the air above the plaza. The sniper drone didn't fire. Its optical chassis violently exploded into a shower of white-hot sparks and melted titanium before plunging into the fountain below. Lyra opened her eyes in sheer disbelief, her gaze darting across the smoke-filled perimeter. From the shattered upper archway of the balcony, a massive shockwave tore through the remaining stone pillars, turning ancient masonry into fine dust. Out of the swirling ash stepped a towering figure wrapped in heavy, war-worn power armor, holding a kinetic sniper rifle that still hummed with heat. The figure moved with terrifying, deliberate efficiency, ignoring the panicked shouts of the approaching guard squads. He didn't offer a grand speech or a heroic declaration. His amber-tinted visor scanned the courtyard with cold, ruthless calculation. As 3 Inquisition drones swarmed toward him, he dropped into a low stance, unleashing a rapid burst of solid slug ordnance that ripped through their armored plating like paper. Lyra stood frozen, her mind struggling to process the impossible sight before her. She had been taught since childhood that humans were extinct, wiped out centuries ago for their uncontrollable savagery. Yet here stood a living human warrior, casually dismantling an elite hit squad. Before Lyra could even process a single word, a massive, calloused hand grabbed her upper arm with firm, unyielding strength. "Move," the human growled, his voice a low, rough rumble that cut straight through the chaos of the courtyard. He pulled her bodily off the ledge, hoisting her over his broad shoulder as if she weighed nothing at all. He dove backward through a shattered stained glass window just as a barrage of heavy laser fire chewed up the stone where they had been standing seconds prior, vanishing completely into the dark, labyrinthine underbelly of the Capitol. The descent through the lower utility shafts was a dizzying blur of rusted pipes, flickering emergency lights, and the heavy stench of recycled ozone. Lyra bounced uncomfortably against the human's shoulder, her royal gown tearing on exposed rivets, but he didn't slow his relentless pace for even a second. Finally, they tumbled through a rusted hatchway into an abandoned subterranean maintenance bay, the heavy steel door slamming shut and locking automatically behind them. The human dropped her gently onto a stack of supply crates, his breathing controlled and steady despite the intense physical exertion of the rescue. Lyra scrambled backward, clutching her datapad like a shield, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and lingering shock. "What are you?" she stammered, her voice shaking as she stared up at the towering silhouette standing beneath a flickering fluorescent bulb. Are you going to ransom me to Vane? The human slowly reached up, the hydraulic servos hissing as he unlatched his heavy helmet and pulled it off, revealing a face lined with deep scars, stubble, and piercing, intelligent eyes. He let out a dry, humorless chuckle, tossing the helmet onto a workbench with a heavy thud. If I wanted to sell you out, princess, I wouldn't have blown half a plaza to pull you out of the fire, the human replied bluntly, pulling a small medical scanner from his belt and checking a shallow cut on his forearm. My name is Jax, and as for what I am, I'm the reason the Chancellor loses sleep at night. He tossed a sealed ration pack and a small bottle of water toward her lap, his gaze sweeping the room's perimeter sensors. Lyra stared at the supplies, realizing with a start that this supposed monster was treating her with a pragmatic, unpretentious decency she had never experienced in the royal palace. Hours later, Jax led Lyra deeper into the subterranean sprawl until they reached a hidden docking bay tucked behind a wall of rusted cargo containers. Moored in the damp hangar sat a battered, asymmetric stealth ship that looked like it had survived a dozen wars and barely held together by welds and prayer. Its hull was scorched black, and pulsing cooling vents hissed softly in the dark. Get inside, Jax instructed, punching a security code into the exterior hatch. We aren't safe in this sector. Vane's internal network will trace my heat signature within the hour, and we need to be off-planet before the orbital blockades lock down. Once aboard, the interior of the ship proved to be stark, functional, and surprisingly clean. There were no gilded ornaments or royal tapestries, just glowing tactical displays, manual toggle switches, and the rich, comforting aroma of brewed bitter leaf water. Jax strapped himself into the pilot's seat, his fingers flying across the analog controls with practiced ease, bypassing the automated systems that the Imperial AI could easily hack. With a deep, bone-rattling rumble, the engines ignited, and the ship slipped silently through a suborbital maintenance tube, breaking atmosphere before the planetary defense grid even realized a vessel had launched. As they cleared the gravity well and drifted into the black void of the outer rim, Lyra finally let out a breath she felt she had been holding for days. She sat in the co-pilot's seat, watching the stars stretch past the viewport while nursing the warm cup of tea Jax had handed her. Why did you save me? She asked quietly, breaking the heavy silence of the cockpit. You don't know me. I'm a Valari princess, everything your people fought against. Jax didn't look away from his navigational charts, his voice dropping to a low, reflective tone as he answered her. Out here, princess, we don't care about bloodlines. We care about who is left standing when the tyrants finish clearing the board. Floating in deep space outside the reach of Imperial telemetry, Lyra spent the next 2 days poring over the royal datapad while Jax monitored long-range sensor sweeps. The data she decrypted revealed a terrifying, suppressed truth. Humanity had never been the bloodthirsty aggressors the Valari Empire claimed. Centuries ago, the human civilization had reached technological and philosophical heights that threatened the absolute control of the early imperial councils. Rather than bowing to a forced, homogenized peace that stripped away free thought, humanity chose to fold themselves into the uncharted dark, going dark on purpose so the Empire could never enslave their minds. Jax caught her staring pale-faced at the historical logs projected from the datapad, his expression softening slightly as he walked over with a wrench in hand. Hard to swallow, isn't it? He asked, leaning against the bulkhead. The history books your people wrote make us out to be monsters because they couldn't control a species that refused to share a single hive mind. Totalitarian regimes don't fear weapons, princess. They fear independent thought. Lyra looked up at him, realizing that everything she had been taught about her family's glorious empire was built on a foundation of manufactured lies and stolen autonomy. The cultural divide between them began to melt away as they shared cramped quarters during the long journey. Lyra watched in fascination as Jax repaired a fractured fuel injector by hand, using mechanical ingenuity instead of relying on the instantaneous, monitored AI systems common across the Empire. In turn, she shared her knowledge of Imperial encryption protocols, teaching him how to mask their ship's transponder code using royal clearance algorithms. They were an unlikely pair, an aristocratic heir fleeing for her life and a battle-hardened human survivor. yet a deep, unspoken bond of mutual respect forged between them as they navigated the silent stars together. On the third day, their navigational computer chimed with an automated ping from an encrypted deep space relay, signaling a message from an underground human contact offering safe harbor at an outer rim neutral trade station. Eager for a safe place to land and rest, Jax set a direct course toward the coordinates pulsing on their tactical map. As the stealth ship dropped out of warp, the massive, ring-shaped station loomed before them in the cosmic dust, looking completely abandoned. There were no blinking docking lights, no automated traffic control hailing them, and no civilian vessels anywhere in the vicinity. Jax slammed his hand onto the console, cutting the throttle instantly as warning klaxons began to chime softly in the cockpit. "It's a trap," he cursed, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the station's dead thermal signatures. Before he could reverse thrusters to jump back into warp, a dozen heavy Imperial dreadnoughts decloaked from behind the station's shadow, their massive plasma cannons locking onto the small stealth ship. At the same time, the station's internal communication array lit up, projecting a life-sized holographic image of Grand Chancellor Vane right in the center of the bridge. Vane's cold, reptilian smile stretched across his face as he looked down at them with absolute amusement. "Did you really think you could slip past my network, little princess?" Vane sneered, his eyes shifting to Jax. "And you, the stubborn ghost of a dead species. You walked right into the cage." Vane revealed that he had tracked them not through their ship's engines, but via a microscopic tracking device secretly embedded within the Royal Crown Lyra had discarded back on the palace balcony. The entire station was a reinforced kill box, and escape was mathematically impossible. Jax didn't panic, he violently threw the ship into an evasive barrel roll, dodging the first devastating wave of cruiser fire by a hair's breadth. He guided the battered vessel straight through the station's open structural gap, crash-landing the ship inside an old, reinforced communications hub where the thick durasteel walls could temporarily block the heavy capital ship bombardment. "Grab your gear," Jax shouted, kicking open the boarding ramp and pulling Lyra into the sprawling, dimly lit industrial complex. Elite Imperial stormtroopers were already rappelling down from the upper gantries, cutting off their escape routes with a wall of plasma fire. They barricaded themselves inside a massive central control room, using heavy server racks and steel bulkheads to create a defensive perimeter. Jax manned the primary firing position, his kinetic rifle roaring continuously as he methodically picked off the advancing Imperial vanguard with ruthless, terrifying efficiency. But the numbers were overwhelming. Wave after wave of heavily armored troopers poured through the blast doors, their sustained fire slowly chewing away at Jax's cover. Sparks rained down from the ceiling, and the air filled with the acrid smell of burnt wiring and ozone. Lyra, realizing she couldn't just cower behind the human while he protected her, grabbed a discarded service blaster from a fallen trooper and took up a secondary firing angle by the doorway. With shaking hands, she squeezed the trigger, catching an oncoming trooper in the shoulder and sending him tumbling over the railing. Jax glanced back, a fierce, approving grin flashing across his scarred face despite the desperate situation. They fought back-to-back as a cohesive unit, the royal heir and the human outcast holding the line against an entire Imperial army with raw, unyielding grit. The heavy blast doors finally buckled under a plasma breaching charge, blowing inward in a cloud of thick, choking smoke. Through the ruined entryway stepped Grand Chancellor Vane himself, flanked by his personal guard of elite cybernetic enforcers. Vane looked entirely untouched by the battle, walking forward with a slow, arrogant stride as he surveyed the smoking control room. Jax slumped against a shattered control console, his power armor cracked down the front, bleeding heavily from a plasma burn to his side, yet he stubbornly kept his rifle leveled directly at Vane's chest. "Magnificent," Vane mocked, clapping his hands slowly as he stopped a few paces away. "A tragic, beautiful end for the last human in the galaxy. You fought well, Jax. But in the end, flesh and blood always lose to absolute control." Vane raised his energy scepter, aiming it straight at Jax's head, preparing to deliver the killing blow personally. Lyra screamed, trying to scramble across the room toward them, but an Imperial enforcer caught her by the hair, forcing her to her knees and pressing a blade against her throat to watch her protector die. Jax didn't look panicked, nor did he look defeated. Instead, a strange, calm relief washed over his exhausted face. He slowly lowered his rifle, letting it clatter uselessly onto the metallic grating, and looked directly into Vane's cold eyes. "You think you won because you cornered a stray in a cage?" Jax whispered, coughing up a streak of dark blood onto his chin. "You didn't trap me, Vane. You just gave us enough time to lock down the grid." With a slow, deliberate motion, Jax tapped the encrypted transceiver built into his gauntlet. "The signal is locked. Burn the sky." Vane paused, his triumphant smile faltering for a fraction of a second as a sudden, massive harmonic hum vibrated through the entire structure of the station. The Chancellor's personal wrist terminal suddenly began flashing red with 100 high-priority emergency alerts, followed by frantic, terrified voices bleeding through the open communication channels of his flagship fleet outside. Vane whipped his head around toward the main viewport, watching in absolute horror as the dark void of the outer rim lit up. It wasn't just one human survivor. Thousands of massive, dormant warp signatures simultaneously flared to life across the star map. For centuries, humanity had not been extinct. They had been quietly waiting in the deep, uncharted sectors, maintaining a vast, dormant network of sleeper ships and orbital dreadnoughts powered down to avoid detection. The encrypted broadcast code that Lyra's royal datapad had been transmitting throughout their journey wasn't just a historical log. It was the master activation key, echoing across every hidden human colony from the galactic core to the rim. Vane's blockade cruisers suddenly found themselves bracketed not by rebels, but by an overwhelming, silent armada of heavy human war vessels that had materialized out of the dark without warning. Panic spread like wildfire through the Imperial ranks as automated defense systems locked onto the new arrivals, only to be instantaneously jammed and overloaded by advanced human electronic warfare suites. Vane stepped back, his face draining of all color as he realized the catastrophic scale of his arrogance. He hadn't wiped out humanity, he had walked right into the trigger of a sleeping giant, handing the keys of the entire galaxy back to the species he thought he had successfully erased from history. The ceiling above the control room suddenly shrieked as heavy atmospheric boarding pods tore through the station's upper plating, slamming into the deck with seismic force. The explosive charges blew open the pod doors, and out poured hundreds of heavily armored human shock troopers, securing the room in seconds and neutralizing Vane's elite guards before they could even raise their weapons. Vane stumbled backward, dropping his energy scepter as two human soldiers grabbed him by the arms, dragging the disgraced Chancellor away in heavy magnetic restraints. Lyra scrambled to her feet, rushing over to Jax, who was being tended to by a field medic injecting regenerative med gel into his armor plating. She dropped to her knees beside him, tears of relief shining in her eyes as the heavy tension finally broke from her shoulders. Jax offered her a weary, genuine smile, extending a scarred hand for her to grasp. "Looks like we broke your empire, princess," he murmured softly. "What do you want to do next?" Lyra looked around the room, seeing the terrified tyrant overthrown and the galaxy outside finally opening up to a future of freedom rather than forced harmony. She took Jax's hand, gripping it tightly as she stood tall beside him, looking out the viewport toward the vast, starlit armada now patrolling a free sky. "We don't rebuild the empire, Jax," Lyra said with quiet, unshakable resolve. "We build something better." Around them, humans and Valari alike began working side by side to secure the station, signaling the permanent end of the old darkness. The galaxy had finally learned the truth, and the song of freedom was ringing out across the stars, no longer a forbidden whisper, but a roar that could never be silenced again. If you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe my channel.